Thank you. I have a few questions, but I'll begin just with one. Dr. Mushtaq, you mentioned, I think you said Ali al-Hujwiri is the first, pretty much the first author in the Indian subcontinent, is that, in the Islamic period. Do you think, I'm intrigued by the fact he's also, of course, you know, the first Persian, this is the first Persian manual of Sufism. Do you think that his focus or treatment of the Salaf is designed to amplify or emphasize, in the context of the Indian subcontinent, the importance of the Salaf as a category, in a way where perhaps outside of the Indian subcontinent, in Central Asia or in Baghdad, that discourse on the Salaf in a Sufi text might not be so necessary. Whereas perhaps, you know, in Iraq and in Central Asia, we have a vast corpus of literature already in place that talks about the Salaf from a theological angle, from the angle of hadith, and so on and so forth. But given your point about authorship of Islamic works in the Indian subcontinent, do you see that he's trying to really anchor Sufism explicitly in the idea of the Salaf and the companions, in a way that somebody outside of the Indian subcontinent might not have to do? Does that make sense, this question? Okay.
You can answer? Yeah, there are mics everywhere.
Hello. Actually, Sheikh Ali Hujwiri is the first writer of Persian language, and there are few writers before him. Actually, in the introduction of my paper, I mentioned some other name also. Actually, the states, the dynasties of Safari, Ghaznavi, Ghori, Seljuqi, these were to make the Persian as official language. So the writing started in Persian, and here Shahnama and some other, Tarikh Tabri also was translated before him. But on Sufism, his book is first book. And I think it is not a very much unique book from those books, those are in Baghdad, because it is continuation of the tradition of Baghdad. He was disciple of Imam Qushayri, the author of Risalatul Qushayriya. But he laid the foundation for another things. After him came Jalaluddin Rumi. Eventually he was also from Afghanistan, Jalaluddin Rumi. He later on migrated to Punya. And other is Fariduddin Attar. These both Persian writers made very distinct Persian Sufi tradition. But as far as Ali Hujwiri is concerned, it seems as continuation of a Risalatul Qushayriya for some unique ideas also. There was another thing. No. Thank you.
Yes, Ricardo.
Thank you very much for both interventions, and I think they actually melt very well, also chronologically speaking, because we went from As-Sulami al-Qushayri, so touching all these manuals of Sufism. I was very interested in the second talk, because, yeah, al-Qushayri and As-Sulami, they don't really have the word Salaf anywhere in the manuals, with the meaning of a certain community, while Hujwiri and Ansari, yes. So the very first question would be, since Hujwiri wrote in Persian, so if the word is actually Salaf also in Persian, just to be sure about this. And then just a question, I mean, there is this, it's not the oldest Persian work on Sufism, al-Hujwiri. There is the commentary of Al-Kalabadhi's manual by Mustamli. And that would be interesting to see if there is some ideas about Salaf, which came at least 70 or 80 years before Hujviri. And my question would then be, do you think there is a relationship between the use of the word Salaf in Hujviri with the Malamati movement? Because the two persons that you mentioned are both of them from the Malamati, Al-Hiri and Qassar. And this is striking to me also because the Malamati were indeed the Salaf, if we agree with the Sulami's idea that they exist and they were before Sufism. They were indeed Salaf of the Sufi as a meta-identity born in Nishapur, but not Salaf in the sense of pertaining to the three generations, because Al-Hiri and Qassad are way later than that. And also, it also strikes me in the Sufi manuals, and I would like a commentary, maybe also from Dr. Qureshi on this, about these quotes often from Al-Hasan al-Basri, who's talking about the good old times, while he himself is one of the good old times, being him a tabi'un. So this also would be interesting to hear. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for informing, for your unique information. Actually, I know that about Sufism. Kalabadi wrote his book in Arabic, and At-Ta'aruf li-Mazhabi Ahli Tasawwuf. And his, in my knowledge, its first explanation was made by Sheikh Banda Nawaz in India. But you mentioned, I don't know about that. So, but as we say, Al-Luma is the first book of Sufism, although there are so many books before was written before Al-Luma, just like Kitab al-Sayd and some other books. But because in a full study of Sufism and with all aspects, I think it is Al-Hujwairi's book, Kashf al-Mahjub. And Kashf al-Mahjub has great impact in Central Asia and in South Asia. But as far as the Salaf, use of Salaf, I didn't think that he used Salaf as a very distinct, he used Salaf as all the Sufis use. The Sufis use Salaf as, and they're distinct between Sahaba and Tabi'in and later jo Sufi masters also. As far as Malamatiya is concerned, I think very difficult to say that the whole sayings of Al-Qassar and Hiri belong to Malamatiya. There are some teachings may say that these are belong to Malamatiya aspect. But there are many sayings which are not different from other Sufis. Even Sheikh Junaid Baghdadi also sometimes praised Hamdun al-Qassar. So thank you very much.
I would just add that I think that, yeah, your point is well taken that, before Iraqi Sufism makes its way to Nishapur, you already have a native tradition of the Malamatiya, and you have the Futuwa guilds, and you have these other things, even the Karamiya, and these other different forms of Islamic piety and practice and mysticism, some of them not really getting into mysticism, but a spectrum of that taking place there. And in a sense, those are the Salaf of what happens in Nishapur. But I think the point I'm trying to get at is that by the time we get to Sulami, they all get subsumed under this meta-identity of Sufism, and that he finds a place for them all under this bigger identity of Sufism. So they're all Salaf in a sense, right? Because they all precede, this move that happens with Sulami Qushayri and Abu Nu'aym and others. So yeah, they would all be Salaf in that respect. But the key thing is what helps them constitute them as some form of Salaf is the notion that they're all some form of sainthood and walaya that's underlying it there, right? In terms of the statement of Al-Hasan, I think that's, again, Qushayri, Sulami, and Abu Nu'aym are all functioning as muhaddithun in their day jobs, right? I mean, even their scholarly method and how they put together their texts is very much interested in isnad and making sure that there's, the best they can, even though they're criticized by the muhaddithun in different ways. But they're still in that hadith culture of learning, right? That hadith movement has already taken place. Shafi'i has already changed kind of our conception of sihha, emphasis on isnad. And so there's this embedded in hadith culture is this sense that there's always the good old days, and that there's things are always never going to be as rosy as they were in the good old days. So even from Al-Hasan, you'll find that. And I think at the time of the fitna onward, you're going to find people saying that there was always the good old days before we started the fitnas, before the civil wars and the like. So there's always statements that are like that, well kind of, circulated in hadith culture. No.
I think the point Ricardo was making is that I think Mustamili is a adaptation or translation, but commentary as well. And so I think you could argue that Kashf al-Mahjub sees itself as a kind of original single authorship of a text, whereas Mustamili, although it's much larger, I think it's 4 volumes in the published edition. And he's a student, I think, of Kalabadi, is he not? Or, yeah. I had this question really for both of you about iqtida and ittiba. And so it's, and I think we'll see this in the other papers, it's possible to think of the Salaf, without a specific phrase, either the use of Salaf and Khalaf. And I think one of the quotes you mentioned, Dr. Mushtaq, was on this idea of iqtida and ittiba, and also invoking Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. And so I know that there's later debates about this. Ghazali is pretty concerned about this, where he argues that the highest saint of, the highest stage of wilaya is Siddiqiyya. And so maybe both of you can say something about that. I mean, it seems as if there's a larger conceptual vocabulary with which to invoke the Salaf without actually using the word Salaf. And that ends up in larger debates, such as this debate about Siddiqiyya as being the highest stage of sainthood, wilaya. So maybe both of you could just...
Maybe I can start off on that. So I think my own way of thinking about this is to say, well, I was alluding to this at the very end of my talk, and it gets this question of iqtida and ittiba'. In a sense, we have to ask when we're looking at what the Sufis or any group are doing is what practice are they involved in, right? So what are they involved in such that you know who your peers are, right? And then when you see the practice, you have embedded in that some sense of standards. Who hits the highest and sets the standards for how that practice is done, and so on and so forth. So again, I'm drawing like on Talal Asad, Alistair McIntyre, that whole conception of a discursive tradition. And so when you ask the question of what's the standards you're aiming for, what's the practice you're involved in, the standards are external to the people who are immediately participating in it. It's something that precedes them, right? And that having that preceding them, being external to them, already tells us then that there's some external standard that we have to follow or meet or match or measure ourselves against. So if we're involved in the business of sainthood of some kind, and we have the Sunni conception of virtuous people, that the most virtuous person after the Prophet is Abu Bakr and then the 4 caliphs, well then if we're seeking virtue, we have the highest level of virtue that is attainable by a human being is going to be Abu Bakr's. Siddiqiyya now becomes the highest standard of virtue, knowledge, gnosis, however you want to gloss the virtues that Abu Bakr has, that's attainable by a human being, whereas the prophets are all bequeathed to him by the divine. So now you have a standard of excellence, and that's going to be external to the person. It's going to be something that being part of a tradition gives them, and it's defined. And then so iqtida and ittiba' are going to be, well, if you want to meet the standards, if you buy into the fact that Abu Bakr is the most virtuous, then you're going to try and meet his standards. If you're going to buy into the fact that these Sufis who you're part of this practice of have hit the heights and set the standards, you're immediately going to want to follow and measure yourself by them. So you're going to have to do some form of conformity to that. So I think embedded in any practice is going to be the notion of iqtida and ittiba, some sense of following and measuring yourself against the best standards there. So that's how I approach it, is thinking about it as a practice and asking, well, what practice are they involved in? They're involved in the practice of cultivating walaya, of gnosis, ethical change, and so on and so forth.